When talking about race relations, I grew up at a time in the South when blacks and whites were just totally separate from each other. And I can remember as a little boy going into Sears department store and they had two water fountains, one labeled white and one labeled colored. And I always thought that colored water came out of the colored water fountain. That's how innocent I was as far as knowing what that meant. But my mother quickly grabbed me by the hand and made me go away to the other water fountain.
Well, my father was a minister of a large church in a community, and our community was probably had 50% black, 50% white, but this was during when we still had white bathrooms and black bathrooms. We had white water fountains and black water fountains, and a black person could not drink out of a white person's water fountain. Everything was segregated. My father was very forward-thinking and very liberal, and he was on these human relations commissions and things like that. And for one, we had a community Thanksgiving service one year, and he invited the whole community, which included blacks and whites, to come to the community church service. And he also invited a black man to minister, to speak, to say a prayer at the service. And this did not go over well with a lot of the community. And during the service, 3 KKK in their full KK regalia with their faces covered and their pointed white hats and white coats walked down to the front of the church and sat right in front of the minister. And they were actually right in front of me. I could have touched their hats if I'd have wanted. And then we left the church. At the end of the service, there were 40 or 50 KKK in their full regalia just wandering outside, there to intimidate us. And also the Grand Dragon, which is like the big president of the KKK. And the KKK, there were a lot of powerful people in the community that were in the KK, but you really didn't know because they were totally covered up. Later that week, we had a cross burned in our yard.
I went to university starting in 1969, which was a great time for civil rights. Went to a small school in Washington State, and I hung around with a lot of African Americans. I played in a bunch of rock bands at the time. And I can remember a time this guy Mike Walls and I were out at night, and we were going to a place called Mom's, which was a little eating place. And as we were walking towards Mom's, a guy came up in a pickup truck and asked us, where you boys going? We said, we're going in for a bite to eat. And I remember he pulled out a shotgun and he kind of pointed at us and let us know, not as long as I'm here, and started coming at us. And I just remember running pretty quickly down the street away from him. And in about 1970-71, the Ku Klux Klan was building in Ellensburg, Washington, and they decided to come and visit our campus. And I can remember standing with a lot of friends, white and black together, carrying things like fireplace irons and those sort of things, and just standing there letting the Ku Klux Klan know that they're not coming on our campus. And that was a pretty big statement.
I grew up in Baltimore, which is a pretty well integrated city, so there was a lot of racism, but I went to integrated schools and I had classes with black kids and orchestra, and there was no real separation for me as a kid. But then I went to visit my relatives in South Carolina, and I was amazed by the situation of black people in the South. It looked like the days of slavery were not over. And here my relatives had these big houses with the white columns, you know, like you see in movies, and all the black people were living in shacks, and they worked in the houses, and it looked just like slavery to me. And then when the adults would talk, I had an uncle that was a sheriff, and he was horrible. And it was like, you could tell that if he arrested a black guy, that guy wasn't going to get any kind of justice at all if my uncle had anything to do with it. It was just awful. So I visited them for 2 summers, and I couldn't go back because they were such racist. Not all of them. I had an aunt who was a teacher, and she tried to convince the rest of the family that it was okay to have these black kids in her class because she was first grade. She said, I just need to teach these children to read just like everybody else. But the rest of the family was horrified that she actually had these kids in the class after the Civil Rights Act was passed. So I had to break with a whole side of my family that I could have stayed in touch with, but I couldn't sit around and listen to them be such racists that they were. It was just amazing to me. And it's, unfortunately, you can go to some areas of the United States and it looks like it hasn't changed a bit. Just the same thing.